Hey, it seems like the baby wants to say something, said my 8-year-old niece, glancing at my son's face. What? That's nonsense. Babies can't talk. My son laughed off what he thought was child's play. But my sister and I were startled and looked at my niece. The grandson blinked his big eyes several times and looked up at me and my sister as if he had something he wanted to convey. It's true, I can hear this child's voice, my niece insisted, tearfully staring at my son as if conveying the baby's words was her mission, even if my son mocked her. My son's wife watched this scene in astonishment. Then what is he saying? I'll listen, just for you, my son said with a condescending look. It wasn't a look one should give a small child. I swallowed hard, watching anxiously for what my niece would say next. My name is Tina. I am 50 years old, living with my husband and our beloved dog, Laura. Until 7 years ago, we lived with my son, Ken, and Laura, but after graduating from community college, Ken started working at a factory and moved out to live on his own. Ken was always rebellious, often not listening to what we said. No matter how much my strict husband warned him, he wouldn't listen, and there were times he got into trouble with the police. Each time, my husband and I would apologize repeatedly, sternly lecturing Ken. But it seemed neither the unpleasant experiences he caused others nor the police warnings bothered Ken, as he repeatedly got into similar troubles. As a child, he was like the neighborhood ringleader, bossing around his elementary school friends, which was still somewhat endearing. As he grew older, his delinquency escalated, causing injuries and troubles to others, leaving us, his parents, at our wits' end. We were worried about him until he graduated from community college. However, upon graduation, he landed a job at a company, and we were overjoyed, thinking Ken had finally turned into a decent person. Becoming a working adult, whether due to being busy or changing his ways, the calls from the police stopped. Living on his own, Ken seemed to have mended his ways. Finally, after years of difficult parenting, my husband and I congratulated each other. 2 years ago, Ken brought home the woman he wanted to marry, Lisa. At that time, Ken, at 25, was on the younger side for marriage, but we never thought the delinquent boy would ever get married, so we were overjoyed at his announcement. This is Lisa, the woman I'm gonna marry. Met her in town. Nice to meet you, I'm Lisa, said the woman Ken brought home, a slender beauty with a modest demeanor, stepping back behind Ken. I'm Tina, Ken's mother. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. It was a mystery why such a lady fell for Ken, but perhaps he had a charming side we hadn't seen. We're planning to get married next month, Ken reported lightly, but his usual confidence meant my husband and I didn't pry. If they had decided together, it wasn't our place to intervene. So, at work the other day, Ken quickly moved on the topic to ramble about his work. Most of it was boasting about how he had saved his workplace from crises or covered for his colleagues' misdemeanors. We half listened, but Lisa attentively nodded along the whole time. Indeed, if a woman listens to this well, it's understandable why Ken fell for her. Despite coming to report their marriage, Ken mostly talked about himself, impressing Lisa. In the end, Ken's marriage announcement turned out to be mostly him rambling on about whatever he wanted to talk about. When Ken went to the restroom, I couldn't help but ask Lisa if she was okay. Are you okay, Lisa? He talks mostly about himself. Oh, I'm used to it, so it's fine. Lisa reassured me, replied like that as if it was nothing. If there's anything, please always feel free to talk to us. We're family now. Thank you. Her eyes were slightly teary, which surprised me. Oh, sorry. Just some dust, Lisa said, wiping the corner of her eye. She might be experiencing the wedding blues. I remembered feeling choked up when I reported my marriage to my in-laws long ago. That day, I watched Lisa leave our house with a nostalgic feeling. To think Ken found such a wife, we can finally relax. Yeah, it's been a long journey, but we made it. We congratulated each other on the upbringing of our son, and that night, we celebrated with some fine wine, getting drunker than usual and going to bed early. 2 years had passed since Ken and Lisa got married, and this year, they had a baby boy. His name is Henry, and from the photos, he looks like Lisa with a well-defined face. The thing is, my husband and I haven't met our grandson yet. Even when we contacted Ken to let us see the grandson, he'd say, "I've been busy lately," or "Lisa doesn't like it," and hardly agreed. Initially, we refrained from visiting right after the birth to not burden Lisa, but after several months without approval from Ken, my husband and I decided to visit Ken and Lisa's home unannounced. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. Hello. Ken and Lisa lived in a rental property in the countryside, about a 40-minute drive from our house. Lisa opened the door. "It's been a while. How are you?" Seeing Lisa after a long time, she seemed to have a frightened expression for some reason. She appeared thinner than before. Or perhaps more accurately, gaunt. "Sorry for the sudden visit. We just couldn't wait any longer to see our grandson. Is now a good time?" "Oh, yes. Please come in." Despite asking tentatively, thinking it might be a busy time, Lisa readily let us in. As soon as we entered, the smell of cigarettes hit our noses. My husband frowned. I was surprised, thinking, cigarette smell in a house with a baby? But didn't mention it and proceeded to the back of the room. Seeing our grandson sleeping in the baby crib in the living room, our cheeks relaxed. When we gently touched his small hand, he twitched but continued sleeping. "He's adorable." "Thank you," Lisa said with a tired face that slightly brightened. "Is Ken not here today?" "He went out with friends today." "Leaving you and Henry behind?" "It's usual for him." Usual must mean Ken often goes out on his days off. "Is Ken helping with parenting?" "I smelled cigarettes. Is Ken smoking?" Lisa just looked down without answering. Affirming the situation, and I felt very sad. "I'll talk to him. Tell him to help you out more." "Please don't." Hearing her firm refusal, I was taken aback. Despite Lisa being so worn out from childcare and housework, I thought of warning Ken, but perhaps for Lisa, it's unwanted interference?
"Oh, no. I appreciate the thought, but he might think I complained."
"Oh." Lisa was worried that if I complained to Ken, it would be her who'd be blamed. "But that would be tough on you, Lisa." "I'm fine. So please don't say anything to him." With Lisa insisting so much, neither my husband nor I could say anything more.
"All right, but please talk to us if anything comes up. We want to help."
"Thank you." Actually, Lisa was raised in a single mother's home, and her mother is currently hospitalized due to illness. So, for Lisa, aside from Ken, my husband and I are the only family she can rely on. We wanted to help Lisa feel a bit more at ease. Afterward, as Lisa sporadically shared about Ken's sloppy lifestyle and his terrible attitude towards her, it pained us to hear. We hadn't known that Ken was being so awful to Lisa while we were not around. Although Lisa refused, we secretly resolved to warn Ken if he continued behaving terribly. A week after my husband and I visited Lisa, on a Saturday when my husband said he had to work, my sister Sarah and my 8-year-old niece Ivy came to visit. Sarah and I have been close since childhood, and even as adults, we often spend time together like this. But this time, it had been a while since we last met, about half a year since I saw my sister, Sarah. Sarah and her daughter, Ivy, came to our house, and first off, they petted our beloved dog, Laura. Ivy, who apparently doesn't usually interact with dogs, looked at Laura with curiosity as Sarah said, "Isn't she adorable?" To which Ivy solemnly nodded. Then, I served tea to Sarah and Ivy, and we caught up on each other's lives. Unlike me, a stay-at-home wife, Sarah works part-time and was venting about her boss. This must be one of the few times she can relieve her stress. I listened to Sarah's stories, nodding appropriately. During this, Ivy, who had been playing with Laura, suddenly turned to us and stared at me with her big eyes. "What's wrong, Ivy?" Then, Ivy started, as if she had something on her mind. "Laura says, thank you for always taking care of me. But she wants more frequent washes, not just once a month but maybe once a week. Really? I was baffled as Ivy began to express Laura's feelings. Looking at Sarah, she was just as surprised, saying, well, it's common for young children to pretend to converse with animals, but specifying the frequency of the baths was peculiar. Especially since it was accurate. I've been wanting to give Laura more frequent baths, but I've been too busy lately. Did Laura tell you that, Ivy? Yeah, she looked like she wanted to talk, so I asked her. At first, I thought Ivy was either lying or fantasizing. However, I was taken aback when Sarah mentioned, actually, this kind of thing happens quite often with her. Last time, despite the weather forecast predicting sunshine, she said a storm was coming and it'd be better to stay home. We had no plans that day, so we stayed in, and sure enough, the weather turned severe, just as Ivy said. Signs were even blown away outside. I was glad we didn't go out. Really? And there's more. She found my car keys right away when I lost them and talked with dogs we met while walking, just like now. No one believes it, but I've come to realize this child has a special gift. Sarah continued, patting Ivy's head. If what Sarah said was true, I too had to believe Ivy had some unique ability. Despite finding it unbelievable, witnessing this power firsthand left me no choice but to believe. Ivy, having relayed Laura's feelings, went back to playing with her as usual. And how about you? How have things been lately? Sarah turned to ask me as I recalled last week's events while watching Ivy. Actually, I met my grandson for the first time the other day. I began, sharing everything I saw at Ken and Lisa's house. How Ken left his wife and child at home to hang out alone on Sunday, his smoking habit, and his domineering attitude towards Lisa. With each detail I shared, Sarah's brows furrowed more and more.
That's terrible. Ken has always been a handful, but I thought he had gotten better recently.
Yes, but it seems I was mistaken. It's just not right for Lisa. Indeed, and worrying. How about we go visit Lisa together next time? Maybe we can help somehow. Of course, we'll let her know beforehand. All right, I'll ask her. The following weekend, Sarah, Ivy, and I visited Ken and Lisa's house again. After notifying Lisa in advance, it turned out Ken was out again, which was just as well. However, I couldn't help but disapprove of Ken leaving his family alone almost every weekend. Hello, Lisa. Sorry for visiting again. It's okay. It's just me and the baby, so any time is fine. Hello. Sarah and Ivy greeted Lisa for the first time in 2 years since we last met as extended family. Ivy rushed over to the crib where my grandson was lying, gently stroking his head. She seemed to like the baby. As we watched Ivy, we sat down at the dining table. Lisa looked even more exhausted from childcare and housework than before, prompting concerned looks from Sarah. Has Ken's behavior changed since then? It hasn't changed. When I try to go out, he yells at me to stay in the house, and he does whatever he wants, like drinking and smoking. If I even slightly resist, he says, "Who do you think is earning the bread for you guys?" Lisa shared, tears brimming in her eyes as she spoke about her daily life. Sarah offered Lisa a handkerchief. Are you okay? I can't believe it. Makes me want to do something about it. I was so angry at Ken's appalling behavior that I couldn't stand it. It would be nice if we could find something on him, something that could get the police involved. Sarah muttered. Hearing this, Lisa gasped. It's not about the police, but lately, we've had debt collectors come to our house. Since my husband wasn't home, I told them they must have the wrong person, but they said, this is Ken's house, right?
Really? That happened? It's hard to ask, but Lisa, do you have debts?
No, I have no idea about any debts. This house is rented, and we don't have any loans. Sarah and I exchanged looks, wondering what was going on. Was Ken in debt without Lisa knowing, unable to pay it back? While we were swirling with questions and searching for the right words to respond.
What a loss today, just my luck.
We heard Ken's voice as the front door was roughly opened. Everyone's face froze as we heard Ken's voice. Huh? Why is Mom here? Ken glared at me, reminding me of his rebellious and delinquent days.
I'm sorry for intruding unannounced. But I was worried about Lisa.
Ken was startled not only by my presence but also by his aunt and cousin being there. However, realizing it was just family, he demanded Lisa to bring him some alcohol. Lisa hurried to the kitchen.
There's no more beer left.
What? That's your job as a wife to restock.
I'm sorry.
Ken retorted arrogantly, as if he were a king, and Lisa shrunk in response, apologizing. I couldn't help but shout, Ken, but he didn't even glance at me, just glared at Lisa. Looking for a way to reprimand Ken, the baby in the crib began to cry. Lisa looked startled and started to move towards the baby, but Ken's fierce glare stopped her in her tracks. Sarah and I exchanged looks, trying to communicate silently about what to do next. That's when Ivy spoke up.
Hey, the baby seems to have something to say.
Ivy said this while glancing at Ken's face.
What? That's nonsense.
Babies can't talk. Ken laughed off what he thought was just child's play. But Sarah and I turned to look at Ivy's face in astonishment. The grandchild blinked his big eyes several times, looking up at us as if he had something he wanted to say.
It's not a lie, I can hear this child's voice.
Ivy insisted, undeterred by being ridiculed by Ken. Tears welling up in her eyes as she stared at him. Lisa watched in astonishment.
Then what is he saying? I'll listen, just for you.
Ken said with a disdainful look that should never be directed at a small child. I watched, holding my breath, as Ivy was about to speak next.
Daddy is planning something bad. Mommy, don't be fooled.
For a moment, Ken's shoulder twitched at Ivy's words. Lisa looked shocked. Sarah and I immediately understood that Ivy was about to use her mysterious ability again.
What do you mean, Ivy?
I urged her to elaborate. Ivy took a breath before continuing.
Daddy has been writing secrets in a notebook and always hides it behind the bookshelf. Also, I love Mommy. Daddy is scary, and he's crying.
Then Ivy walked over to the living room's bookshelf, pulled out a few books, and found a small notebook hidden behind them, handing it to Sarah.
Here it is.
Seeing the small notebook, Ken's face turned pale. Sarah, gauging the reactions of Ken and Lisa, opened the notebook.
This is a life insurance policy. Oh, the insured is Lisa, and Ken is the beneficiary. There's even a contract attached.
Now Lisa's face turned pale, and I took the notebook from Sarah to see for myself. As Sarah said, there was a life insurance policy worth over $200,000 taken out on Lisa, and I couldn't believe my eyes.
Ken, what's this all about?
I never thought my son, who had a history of delinquency, could do something so cruel to his own wife. I glared at him, wanting to confront him about this life insurance right away.
Damn, I had no choice. I ran out of money. Besides, anyone would get life insurance, right? It's not like I was planning to do anything to Lisa.
Ken rattled off excuses as if trying to justify himself. The fact he mentioned not having money was corroborated by the debt story I heard from Lisa. It was clear where the money had gone, considering how he leaves his wife and child to hang out every day. Probably wasted it on some frivolous activities.
Insurance is usually something you get for yourself, right? Taking out a life insurance policy on Lisa without her knowing and acting ignorant about it is just wrong.
My logical point left Ken at a loss for words. Then, Ivy spoke up again, adding fuel to the fire.
The baby told me. Daddy's been mumbling to himself that he got fired from his job for stealing money from the company. And he's planning to do something bad to Mommy to get money. What?
I exclaimed, shocked by her words. Fired from his job? Then what had he been doing all this time during weekdays? Lisa, too, stared at Ken in disbelief.
What are you talking about? You don't have any proof.
Ken spat back at Ivy. I stepped in front of Ivy, unleashing all the anger I had been holding back. Proof? Ivy just told you everything. She can understand the baby's words, not just that. Finding this notebook wasn't a coincidence either. What Ivy says is true. You've seen the life insurance policy with your own eyes. Stop making excuses and apologize to Lisa. I scolded Ken more fiercely than ever. Heartbroken to know my son could attempt such a terrible thing against his wife. Ken, who had boasted about covering for his subordinates' misconduct, was actually the one causing trouble. It was disheartening and made me feel nauseous to think my own son could sink so low.
What the hell?
Ken ruffled his hair, twisting his face in frustration. But it was all his own doing. No one felt sympathy for him. After I scolded Ken, Lisa seemed to gather some courage and finally spoke up.
I never imagined you could do something so despicable. I want nothing to do with you anymore. Pay back the debt yourself. Goodbye.
With those words, Lisa took the baby and stormed out of the house. We watched in astonishment. Ken muttered complaints after Lisa left, but after being rebuked by Sarah and me, he ended up sulking. Though it was unexpected for Lisa to leave, I was glad we could expose Ken's wrongdoing. Looking at Ivy, who seemed content after speaking her mind, she stretched and said, "I'm hungry. Shall we go get something to eat?" Well, we'll be taking our leave now. With that, Sarah, Ivy, and I left Ken's house behind. A place that could be visited by debt collectors at any moment. I decided never to return to this house again, not just for Lisa's sake.
Why the hell?
Ken was still shouting until we closed the door, but we ignored his pathetic cries and left the building. A few days later, worried about Lisa, I contacted her. "I'm sorry to have worried you. I've gone back to my grandmother's house. Please feel free to visit Henry anytime," she assured me, which relieved me. Lisa had sent Ken divorce papers right after that incident. Ken was reluctant to agree to the divorce at first, but after Lisa insisted she would not let him see the child unless they divorced, he finally gave in, and the divorce was settled. Lisa, whose mother is hospitalized, said she's back at her grandparents' seeking employment and plans to place Henry in daycare soon. Ken's miserable days began, forced to work part-time daily to repay his debts. Initially, he begged my husband for money, but after hearing the full story, my husband was furious and told him, "Don't ever come back home." Thankfully, that meant Ken no longer sought help from us. I don't feel sorry for him. He brought this upon himself. Now, I occasionally visit Lisa and her grandparents' house to play with Henry. Despite everything that happened because of Ken, Lisa and her family have warmly welcomed Sarah, Ivy, and me. Ivy, do you know what Henry just said?
Yeah. I'm happy I can play with Mommy and Grandma.
Really? That's great. Lisa was just oppressed by Ken. She's actually a kind and polite, wonderful person. That's why she still treats us without any discrimination. For me, that was enough.